All right, welcome to my talk on corpus linguistics in ESP in German higher education. I'm Claudia Wunderlich. I'm a professor of English for specific purposes, ESP, and German as a foreign language here at the University of Applied Sciences, Würzburg-Schweinfurt in Germany. My talk is going to be broken down into the following sections. So first of all, I'm going to start with ESP and corpus linguistics more generally. Then I'm going to broach the topic of higher education ESP courses in Germany and corpus linguistics and how commonly corpus linguistic tools and methods are used from my point of view, from my observations. Next are the uses of corpora and the pros and cons in our context. Section 4 is going to be ready-made versus self-compiled corpora. Number 5 are corpus tools, so tools to compile and query self-compiled do-it-yourself corpora. Number 6 is going to be some best practice suggestions for compiling corpora for ESP. Number 7 is going to deal with recording formats for our students to retain important lexical items that they glean from corpus work. The penultimate section is going to be challenges, and finally ways forward. Now let me start by saying that in the past 6 decades, ESP has become one of the central areas of teaching English as a foreign language, and that despite a lack of a precise definition. Nevertheless, it is frequently understood as an approach to language teaching that targets the current and the future academic or occupational needs of learners, focuses on the necessary language genres and skills to address these needs and assist learners in meeting these needs through the use of general and or discipline-specific teaching materials and methods, as was found by or stated by Lawrence Anthony in his introduction to ESP in 2018. As such, ESP tends to also include EAP, English for academic purposes, and even ESAP, which means or stands for English for specific academic purposes, areas which have been gaining ground at German institutions of higher education with the introduction of EMI, English Medium of Instruction programs. Corpus linguistics, on the other hand, can be defined as dealing with some set of machine-readable texts which to study a specific set of research questions, which are used to study a specific set of research questions. So simply put, a corpus is a collection of texts that you're interested in to find out more about the language that is used in that specific text or genre. And this is a way to identify patterns of language. So those can be studied as well as the frequency and distribution of lexical items. Corpora of various sizes have become increasingly more widespread since the 1960s, and particularly since PCs and the internet became widely available. So basically, there's been a revolution since the mid-1990s, and they have therefore frequently been used in the compilation of dictionaries. So the major dictionary companies base their findings on dictionaries, but also grammar books and teaching materials more generally. You often read this on textbooks and whatnot, and I'm sure that even if ESP or ELT instructors have never worked with corpora themselves, they will have heard about corpora because they are so widespread or widely discussed. Now, despite this, corpora, and despite the fact that corpora have increasingly been recommended both for teaching ESP, so for example, John's 1997 has suggested that students work as language detectives. And Nation 2016, for example, has written on how to compile word lists for ESP and other language courses, and more generally for compiling language teaching materials, for example, Tomlinson 2011. This has also been done in the context of action-oriented teaching in higher education to identify and investigate collocations or chunks, collocations, semantic preferences, semantic prosody, both because of its student-centeredness and to inform the instructor about the relevance of the various lexical features encountered in the course materials, which was written, for example, in Fisher et al. 2009. Despite this, though, when it comes to ESP courses at German higher education institutions, with a special focus on universities of applied sciences, corpus tools, and particularly compiling do-it-yourself corpora for languages for specific purposes, do not seem to be widespread, judging from recent conference contributions. This may be for various reasons. By the way, these are just my observations. I know that there are some colleagues and practitioners who are also corpus linguists in this field, and some people have just gone under my radar. So please do not be offended, and rather reach out to me and get in touch, because I'd really love to hear more about it. But actually, I have not heard or found any information on colleagues compiling and or working with their own do-it-yourself corpora at universities of applied sciences in the field of ESP. That said, corpus usage, of course, does not only have pros but also cons. But let's first look at some pros, why you'd want to use corpora in ESP or for ESP courses at universities of applied sciences, or more generally in higher education. So first of all, you can work with authentic text, authentic language. Patterns can be detected that would otherwise go unnoticed. So you need a large number of texts and words to be able to identify certain patterns which are more or less frequent. Then you can gather both quantitative and qualitative insight. This way, the most relevant lexical items can be identified with the help of frequency lists, although we should be wary of basing our judgment entirely on frequency lists. That does not seem to be an appropriate way. I'll probably come back to this at a later point. And last but not least, it's a student-centered approach. It's a hands-on approach that is favored in modern language pedagogy. Some main disadvantages, however, are that spoken and multimodal data or corpora are rare, as such data is hard to obtain. For example, for privacy reasons, some things take place behind closed doors in a boardroom, for example, and it can't simply record the data. And even when you're able to record spoken data or even film something and capture multimodal, for example, hand gestures, multimodal information such as hand gestures, it requires much effort to transcribe and annotate the data for corpus use. Then it's rather difficult to achieve representative in corpus, and this may limit the usefulness of the output, although there are ways to limit this danger, and we all should pay special attention to this when we attempt to compile do-it-yourself corpus, but it can never be fully excluded. Extra time is also needed to introduce corpus tools to students, and this may be a particular challenge in scenarios where you only have very limited contact time. If it's a 2-hour course only and it takes more than 2 or 1 weekly unit to address all questions, to show the students the tools, etc., then it's probably going to be an issue to be able to teach all the content matter you planned on teaching. Of course, with online tools and blended learning, this may be less of an issue when you are able to record some input or link videos, etc., but still. And in addition to that, the technical nature may also be a barrier both to students and instructors, especially since more advanced queries require regex, so a sort of logical language, and full-fledged programming languages such as R and Python to visualize the data in more advanced ways, or for example, for web scraping purposes when you want to semi or fully automatically pick data from the internet. That said, the pros usually outweigh the cons, and therefore the next question that usually arises when you decide to apply corpus methods or use corpus in ESP classes or to prepare ESP materials, the question is whether to use ready-made corpora or to use do-it-yourself or self-compiled corpora. So these days, a variety of ready-made corpora are available, and many of them are online for research. For example, Sketch Engine or LexTutor. Via Sketch Engine, you can also access the British National Corpus. There are also other ways to access this corpus, or COCA, the Corpus of Contemporary American English, which is also available via a website from Brigham Young University, which also offer manifold corpus resources, different corpora, or the PERG corpus for specific languages, technical languages, for example. Or you can also use Google as web as corpus, or there are some web specific search engines for searching the web as corpus. So not Google, but something that uses Google, but visually represents the output for you in a different way. But Google Books Ngrams are also relevant, for example, if you want to find out how the usage of a word evolved in literature over time, from, so not just from a synchronous, but also in a way from a diachronic angle. I won't have the time to go into much more detail. There are resources out there that list more corpus resources and different corpora. For example, Martin Weisser's homepage at martinweisser.org, and in the literature you'll find all kinds of lists and references to other corpus tools, and there are also offline corpora, for example, the NRAN email corpus and whatnot. But usually those ready-made corpora are not specific enough for ESP courses in higher education when it comes to Lexes, as was also found by Nation in 2016. For this reason, self-compiled corpora for research and teaching purposes have been or are recommended. And Lawrence Anthony, during the 2021 summer school at the University of Birmingham, therefore suggested to choose a topic area, then to review the literature, identify a gap, and then see whether you were able to search or conduct your queries in a ready-built corpus in the target area. If this is the case, you just analyze that corpus and discuss the results. Or if that's not the case, for example, because you want to investigate the language of industrial engineering and logistics, as I'm planning on doing, and there are no specific corpora to include those two fields, then you design your own corpus, decide on a sampling procedure. So you decide on what journals, textbooks, newspaper articles, etc. to use. And you collect, convert, clean, annotate, and save the data. And this way you can work with your do-it-yourself corpus. So the tools to compile and use your own corpus are first of all, which allows you to collect, clean, and annotate the data. And in addition to that, all the query software such as Würzburg tools and ANCOM can be used. So this can be seen in pictures, and Plus is really convenient. You can partly copy and paste text, and you can clean them, for example, delete captions that you don't want in the corpus, and you can annotate them by, for example, adding information that helps you organize the corpus data. Now, what are the best practice ideas suggested for compiling corpora for easy? So I already worked in this field in 2018 when I gave a conference at the Teaching Language Corpus conference at the University of Cambridge. And next semester, I'm going to have a partial research leave, and I will continue to work on do-it-yourself corpora in the fields I already mentioned: industrial engineering, which we call business and engineering, and HWS and logistics. And Lawrence Anthony, also at the 2021 Birmingham Corpus Linguistics Summer School, he suggested the following best practice steps. So first of all, to identify or define the value of the research aim, then to make sure that the corpus is balanced by defining a good sampling procedure, and to make sure that the texts are timely so that they're not outdated. Then to address data collection approach, I'll come back to that in F because they go hand in hand. But before starting to collect data, you must make sure that you've got the rights and permissions to do so. So on the one hand, to be able to store text from a website or a database on your own devices, and or to use, for example, concordance lines, example sentences in publications or teaching materials, which may not always be the case. And if that's not the case, you may not be able to use them or not be able to use concordance or example lines or example sentences. Then you need to use the right file format and encoding. So, for example, in Notepad++, there are various ways of storing your data, and the different corpus tools require a certain format only, and you have to make sure that you meet that requirement. Then the collection method will come into play. So, for example, do you manually copy and paste your text into Notepad++, or will you resort to web scraping, for which you need, for example, programming skills in R, etc. And then finally, the text must be converted, cleaned, and potentially annotated. So I've addressed this when I talked about how to, or what tools to use to create a do-it-yourself corpus before. Now, other than frequency lists or vocabulary lists, which will be partly based on frequency and collocations, etc., it seems useful to offer recording formats to students to help them retain and more easily memorize lexis. And Mark Powell, for example, shared those two possibilities. For example, here you have a noun like information, and you collect or gather information, and pertinent information would be an adjective to collocate with that noun, or you would have take, an image, take part in, take place, etc. would be collocations for take. So those will be ways to record the information other than mind maps, simple graphs, and vocabulary lists, for example. So let me turn to the challenges before I conclude. Challenges are to create a balanced topical corpus or corpora, creating useful vocabulary lists not based on frequency alone. So you need to use good judgment to see if logically related lexis is missing, etc. Another challenge is, as I said, gathering data and insight into spoken language or multimodal data, creating enough student interest and creating engaging tasks. So some may love using computers and querying computers, but others may need extra motivation or stimulation. And then the question is how to integrate it into modern task-based ESB courses and aligning it with the criteria of the CEFR supplement, the new supplement. And finally, enhancing programming instructors' programming skills. There is an apostrophe missing, instructors' programming skills for leveraging full potential of corpora and ESB. To conclude, ways forward would be, or to say that corpus studies provide pertinent insight into ESB, which both students and instructors benefit from. Corpus tools and do-it-yourself corpora should become integral part of the ESB instructors' toolbox at German universities of applied sciences. And working groups should be established within German language organizations for higher education to share knowledge and develop best practice solutions. So if this already exists, please do let me know, but I haven't found it yet. Thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to seeing you at the conference, and we'll be glad to accept your questions. See you then. Bye-bye.